Hello everyone, very happy to be here another year. I think I haven't missed a single VueConf Toronto so far. My name is Eduardo, so I'm a front-end developer. I'm a Vue.js core team member. I'm the author of the router, Pinia, Viewfire, but I've also contributed to other projects. I'm from Spain, but I live in France. And if you want to reach out online, you can find me as Posva. And I've been contributing to Vue, or rather the Vue ecosystem, for a long time. Long time is 8 years, more or less. That's quite a lot. And I see things change a lot, right? So I've seen Vuex come and go. So Vuex, that was the previous state management solution. And it was very different, right? It was based on the Flux architecture. It was based on these functions called commit, dispatch to do things. And we also had no TypeScript because TypeScript wasn't a thing back then. We even had Flow at the time. And things have evolved since then. We have seen the uprise of TypeScript. We have seen the composition API arise in Vue and change a little bit the way we do things. So we need to rethink things. So for example, lazy loading, stores, actually having TypeScript support, and many more things. And all these things I'm mentioning here are actually the features of Vuex 5. Now, Vuex 5 never actually saw the light of the day of the light. Never actually became a thing. It just became Pinia instead, right? Now, I think this played out for the best because we don't have any issues searching online for Vuex and having two complete these APIs appearing. And maybe you don't know it, but Pinia has been around for 4 years now. I think the first release was November 20, November 18, something like that. So it's really close to 4 years. And these have given us enough time to see bad patterns arise. And I don't want to see this as a disregarding way or anything. I've learned a lot from that. So I rather want to share what I've learned with you about Pinia. And I want to first start talking about habits. So it's normal that with two different patterns, two different store patterns, we are still sometimes forcing the old ones into the new library. For example, just reading state. When you are using Vuex, you have this intermediate state property that you get access through the store instance and then get access to the state. And if you want, you can create a getter with the exact same name as the state property. It's hidden, for example. And that doesn't matter because at the end, you're still accessing through that intermediate property getters. Now, in Pinia, you can do this if you want, but we access the store through, we access the state and the getters properties through the store directly. There is no intermediate property. So what is hidden referring to? We don't actually know. Now, in practice, in Pinia, you cannot name the state getters or actions the same way. Now, when migrating over from Vuex to Pinia, this is something you might find yourself facing without realizing it. So it's actually not intentional, but it might happen. Now, I think this is for the best because you're hiding away the technical implementation of the property. It doesn't matter if it's a state, if it's a computed, or something else. What matters is the name, the business meaning it has, and behind the scene, it might be a computer property, a getter, a ref, a reactive, it doesn't matter. And so, in practice, what you want to use getter for are meaningful things, right? Getters should do something. They should return, usually combine some of the state you have and return something new. For example, you have a list of products and you have a search. You want to filter the products with some extra properties, some other state. Now, another one very close to the reading state is mutating the state. When you use Vuex, you had this mutations concept that doesn't exist in Pinia. And there was no other way of changing the state, right? You have to use the mutations, and usually you find yourself writing this set hidden, or sometimes shouting set _ hidden. In Pinia, you find yourself migrating, and sometimes, well, just for the ease of migration, you just add an action that is called that way. Now, there is nothing wrong per se with the approach, unless you're, unless you're paid by the amount of lines you write, which probably is not the case, and you should probably be using something else like Angular if that was the case anyway. But if you're here, probably not doing that anyway. So you can remove all of that, right? In Pinia, there is no need to create an intermediate step to mutate the state. So what I want to tell you is avoid adding meaningless actions. Set something, probably not worth. It's totally fine during the migration, but remember to clean them up later on. It's totally fine to have actions that are just mutating the state, however, and it's usually useful when you have multiple states that are meant to be changed together, because otherwise you find yourself in inconsistent states. And so overall, I just want to tell you that is nice. It's a good idea to say goodbye to these old patterns and to embrace the new patterns that we have with Pinia that are usually going to bring a lot more good stuff. Another thing I want to talk about is self-sabotage. So these are some patterns that I've seen. I sometimes don't know where they come from. I try to find where they come from because sometimes it comes from the docs, so I want to absolutely fix that in documentation. But very often I never find the actual source. Now I've seen these before. It's externalizing the state object out of an option store. Sometimes for the sake of maybe adding the type, I'm not sure. I think this comes from Vue 2, where you could have the data on components that you could extract and do some hacky things around that. This is not a good idea. Not a good idea because the point of having a function is to control, or rather let Pinia control when the state is created, so you don't have that immediate creation of the state. And also, it allows Pinia to create a fresh new state on need. So this can be for plugins, can be for the dev tools, so developer experience, many cases. But also, this version completely fails on SSR, okay? You don't want to use this on SSR because you're gonna share the same state instance with all your applications. So not a good idea. Instead, you just move everything to the function, okay? Everything inside of the function. And you can just use an explicit return type if you want to type the state using an interface, which is a very common practice, and I will say very good, actually. Now, let me talk to you about read-only state. Now, these are 3 ways of doing read-only state that I've seen online and others I come up with. The first one is using read-only. Now, read-only is from Vue. It allows you to make a ref or a reactive object read-only, as the name implies. It will break plugins, DevTools, and SSR because from outside of the store, the state cannot be changed anymore. So the DevTools cannot change the store anymore, no time travel, plugins cannot add stuff, so it doesn't work. Then we have the 2 other ones. We have a JavaScript getter, so just get, and then the name of the function, return the value. And then Pinia getter using a computer property. The problem with these 2 is that they are not state. So if you see the return object, we are not returning the original user property. So Pinia has no way to know that there is a state property called user that has a value. So to make that work, there is actually a very simple fix. Is to return the state property. And you can rename it if you want, and then use any of the other 3 ways that we saw of accessing the user. These will work with SSR and plugins, etc. But we are still exposing the user at the end, all right? So there is another way to completely hide the user from the user property from the rest of the application. And it might not be as intuitive, but it's to create an extra store. Now, this store is going to hold the private state, and it's not going to be exposed to the rest of the application. But you can still use that store in other stores. So within the store, you can consume, mutate, do anything you want with the state, but you don't return that user anymore. That user is completely hidden. Usually you have some getters around, so you derive some of the data of the user for the rest of the application. But this is a very useful pattern that I don't see that often outside. Next, let's talk about TypeScript. So TypeScript should be about reducing risk, and about safety, not about creating the problems for you. Now I want to know, you see those refs with the object as an interface. Who has seen this code or even written this code before? I've written myself, so don't be ashamed. Okay, a few hands, okay, 10s or something. You should definitely create a Jira ticket and change this as soon as possible, okay? This is what I call the YOLO cast. And you might be thinking, isn't that just doing as any or TS ignore? And I beg to disagree because these are so different. When you're using a TS ignore or as any, at least we are accepting that Typescript was too much to deal with, and we say, okay, you win Typescript, I'm just gonna call it a day. I know that my code works, I don't wanna complicate things too much. When you're casting an empty object to an interface, we are straight out lying to ourselves. We know that that's not the correct version of the object. So it can backfire very well, very easily, right? If you have any object with nested objects inside, this will not give you a type error, but will give you 100% of the time runtime errors if you call it in the wrong place. So it's we're completely losing the purpose of using TypeScript here. Now, the solution is, of course, to use TypeScript to the right way. I lost the connection to the slides. Use the keyword. Now, ref, shallow ref, computed, they all expose these generic that you can pass. And just so you know, the ref, you can pass a generic to it and then not give it a value, and you will still get a ref of undefined or the generic. Or if you prefer, you can use the explicit null notation with a union, and that will work. I lost the notation with the connection, so just switch to the computer. So at least this time you will have a TS error like that, which is what we want. Now, what I recommend you, of course, is not to do the cast. You really definitely want to avoid that, but also use the generics, and you can also, if you have option stores, use a cast with a union. So you initialize to null, you don't have a value initially, and you cast to either the user or null. This is totally valid in TypeScript, and it's safe. Now that we have the TypeScript part covered, I want to dive into the new patterns. So these are more subtle, okay? Because when you have new ways of doing things, when you create an API, you don't know how the API is going to be used. So it creates subtle problems down the line that you don't see until later on during development on the application. Let's talk about the most obvious one, accessing the store. When we use Vuex, we have this create store function that gives us a store instance right away. So we can just use it, right? We just call directly, state, getters, whatever you want. Now, of course, in SSR it's a little bit more complex because you need one store per applications per request. But in the component, which is usually how you interact with the store, you have these $store property that you can access as these, or in the template without these. And with the composition API, this became useStore from Vuex. It still gives you access to the store instance that we created on the other file. We just access it without the $, and that's pretty much it. Now in Pinia, we can use Pinia in Options API too, but I'm just focusing on the composition API here. We have one composable per store, and now this is important, okay? So we access the store by calling the composable, and then we just have the variable. Now, we don't get a store instance right away. We get a composable, or a function that creates the store once, okay? And because it's a composable, it cannot be called anywhere. Now, if this is not familiar to you, I know the link is too small, but it doesn't matter. There is a page about composables in the Vue.js documentation. If you haven't read it, I really recommend you to read it. It's one of the most crucial patterns to understand in Vue, and it will help you a lot to create maintainable code with Vue. Now, some people say, oh, I don't want to call this composable in every component. So what do? They just call the use store within the same file. They find the store, and they export the store. And what happens is that they get greeted by this nice little message that says, get Pinia, didn't find an active Pinia. By the way, the error has improved in the last version, I think. The idea is Pinia is not able to know what is the active, so root store, if you prefer, which is Pinia, to connect the store to. So the way this works is when we call app.usePinia, we are setting the active Pinia to that whatever parameter we call. From that point on, we can call useStore, and it will be connected to that Pinia object. Within components, we also have access to the Pinia associated with the application because we get access to it through inject. Now, inject provide is another whole topic. It's used by most libraries in Vue.js to make things just work seamlessly. In reality, you can even call useStore before installing by explicitly passing the Pinia instance. In practice, you are never going to do that, or almost never. And you should definitely use it as a last resort. Because in SSR applications, for example, or, I mean, it's always SSR applications to be the problem, to be honest. But you're not going to get access to the Pinia instance that easily. So instead, focus on how we use the store. So for example, you cannot call it in a function, in a method of a component. We have the same problem. We have the problem that in SSR apps, we might have a cross-state pollution risk, which is just a fancy way of saying that your application isn't safe. You are exposing your data users to other users. Now, the way to fix this is very simple, and I think most of them probably guessed it. You just move the composable outside of the functions. It has to be at the setup level. So if this is not clear for you, again, check the Composables page on the Vue.js documentation. Very important concept. Is going to help you a lot in your Vue applications. You can use the search Composables. It appears. All right. Now, the thing is, it's not always intuitive where you can call this composable either, right? For example, in navigation guards, you're not supposed to be calling the store outside of the navigation guard if you need it. You're supposed to be calling it inside. Now, it looks a bit weird. Why would I be able to call this composable inside a navigation guard? In practice, the places where you can call the composable or the stores is within setup, within navigation guards, with the other composables and other stores. Now, some libraries are going to expose these pattern, okay? There are places where the library is connected to the application and is able to tell to other libraries, hey, this is the current application, so if you need to use inject for anything, here's the current application. So that's what happens behind the scenes, and that's why we can use it inside the navigation guards. Now, I want to talk about reactive versus ref very quickly. So these are two functions to create a reactive state in Vue. Now, the first one, reactive, only works on objects and doesn't allow reassignment. The second one works on objects, on primitives, anything, and you can reassign. Now, usually, I personally use reactive more on collections because you have functions to modify the actual collection or to clear them, and I use refs on everything else. It's just a little bit more convenient to not have to write the dot value sometimes. Now, in stores, the error is a little bit more subtle because if you if you return a reactive array in a store, you will be able to change it to a new array outside of the store. There is no error from that, okay? This is totally valid. This is because Pinia is a reactive object and it benefits from the ref unwrapping, which is a whole other topic that I won't be diving into in the talk. But the final problem is we disconnect the source of truth. We have two different states that are disconnected, and therefore we have application out of sync and other issues like that. Definitely not the thing you want to get into, right? So what do we do? Well, of course, you can use reactive for collections because most of the time you're not going to do equals new set. Now, I know that arrays you can do splice or length equals 0 if you're in 1999, but we don't do that anymore. And most of the people just reassign a new array anyway. So in practice, try to use refs for arrays, and you can still keep reactive for collections, but avoid using a reactive on arrays because you are most likely find one day someone forgetting that, well, when you're outside of the store, you don't know if it's a ref or reactive, right? So it's very easy to just reset the array manually like that. All right, and now my favorite topic, overusing stores. So there is a trend, I think not only in Vue, but we tend to use the stores too much. We put too much things on the stores. And this is such a difficult thing to realize. You usually need new eyes on your projects to see that. So I want to talk about some of the some examples of showing you why this is an issue and another approach of seeing things. Now, I will spare you the classic example of props. So when you don't use props and put everything on the store, I'm going to talk about some global state. Now, very often you have the store to fetch and cache somehow the data that you're fetching. So for example, we have a project stores, and we have a list of stores, and we have a current project. So we have in a page, we have the list of projects. We can select one of the projects, and we get the details of the project. Very classic master detail page. Now, usually, we want to connect that to the URL, because if we don't, when we reload the page, there is nothing going on. So you might go for this, like pushing the URL and also fetching the data. I'm not lying to you. I've seen this in real projects when I do consulting. So I think it's more common than we think. And what happens here is that, well, if you reload the page, you lose the data. You have a URL with the correct ID, but the store is not fetching the data. Now, there are many ways of fixing this, okay? So one of the ways is to transform the current into a computer property that looks up in the list of projects the actual project. This only works if your list of projects contains all the details, which is not always the case. Usually when you have a search or a list with that you can search for, well, you only have a subset of the information that you can look up. But it's something that people usually forget, is that within Pinia stores, we can use other composables. So we can use useRoute, useRouter, the same way you can use ref. Okay, it just works. Now, most of the time, as I said, the list is going to have a subset of information. So we still need to fetch all the details of the project, okay? So let's focus instead on that select project function. Now we need to redo this, of course, because current value now doesn't work. So we're going to add a new list or a new state with the details of that project. And we're going to use a map, because why not? We're going to fetch the details of the project and then put it in the place that we want. So another way of seeing this is, why not just watch the route, right? So that way we can disconnect the push of the new route from the fetching of the state. This way we can connect fetching to the actual state, which is the URL, because the URL is also global state at the end of the day. And so here, select project becomes just router push, and we have a watcher where we are actually fetching the actual data. And so, of course, we need to go back to a current, change it, and just look up the map. Now we can go back to the page, and we can, I left it, I forgot, but we can remove the project, select project. It doesn't exist anymore. We can just push. Now, the interesting part about this is that now if we reload the page, if we go back in history, if we go forward, everything works because it's based on the URL. Except it doesn't really work. It works for SPAs, and it doesn't work for SSR. And I know SSR is again, a pain. But it's still something I think we should take into account, because very often we can just add a little bit of work for a pattern to work on both SPAs and SSR, and maybe in the future it will pay off. Now, I still want to say that we learned something here, and it's about global state. The store is not the only place to store global state. Now, this might come off as obvious, but I think that you should always prefer the route first before the store to store anything global. Of course, it's just a small string, so you cannot store a list of elements. I mean, you can store a small list of filters and stuff like that, but you cannot do much more than that. But Pinia and the router are not the only places where you have global state. You can have also browsers APIs, the local storage, IndexedDB, stuff like that, and then all the libraries that you can find around, like VueQuery, for example, or well, Nuxt also have their own global state. But my point here is a little bit different. My point is, I think that seeing Pinia as just global state is a little bit limiting, okay? And it also sometimes led us to take the wrong path. So I want to show you that Pinia can be seen also as what I like to call a composable singleton. So combining both the composable concept and singletons. So a singleton is some kind of class that is only instantiated once, and then you retrieve that instantiation. So here for Pinia, we really have that because we are defining stores with composables, but the composables are only executed once, okay? So we are encapsulating global stateful logic instead of just encapsulating stateful logic. And it might look like, wait, what is the point? Well, the point is, look at stores as composables that can also be used in other composables, okay? The store gives you a way to say how the data is preserved, how the data is stored. It's global, it's accessible around your application. But composables give you a lower level of control because they are instantiated in components. So they give you also the timing of when to do things. So you can combine these two things. For example, in the concept of data fetching, you can create a store to have all the interesting state, the data, the errors, which I'm omitting because otherwise it becomes too long, loading state, fetching state, cache times, you name it. Then we create a composable, so I'm naming this use query, that uses that store, okay, to retrieve the current data, but also to maybe ensure that an entry exists, like a cache entry exists. And then we can add things like on-server prefetch and unmounted. So this works on SSR. So on-server prefetch is going to refresh and return a promise of the fetch on the server. And then on mounted, you can also redo it again, so to ensure the data is fresh. Now, of course, you can go very complicated with that because we have cache there, so one of the most complicated problems in programming. But then you can return data, errors, and refresh functions, anything you want. And you can go further. You can say, okay, I can connect these to other browser-specific events. Okay, it's something you cannot really do in a store because you're not necessarily in the context of the browser. So you can refetch or refresh when the user focuses the window, so that could be going to another tab, coming back. You can also refetch when the browser goes offline, then online, so depending on your public transportation. These are things that VueQuery, for example, do for you, okay? I'm just using that as an example because I think it's very useful. And of course, I don't have the time to go completely in detail with this approach, but I think it does teach another way of approaching the problem, another way of interacting with the store. So not putting too much, not putting as many things on the store, but also taking some of the logic outside because it belongs more into a component. And so it belongs more into a normal composable and not a composable singleton or a store. Okay? And if you're interested into diving deeper, I launched a Mastering Pinia course recently. Who has bought these before? Okay, a few people. So I have a special discount, 25 Toronto for $25 off. It's still ongoing, so it's still early access pricing. And I was supposed to have cute little stickers, but I decided to trust a Swiss company instead of sticker mill, and I regret it. I never thought I would say that. I really always trust the Swiss, but I don't have my stickers, so it will be a next time. And there is a lot more to cover in the course. It goes from some of the basics of Pinia, but it really tries to go deep. Okay, it's more targeted to intermediate or people who have some experience with Vue.js developing applications. And it goes into some of these details, and I think it teaches way more than just Pinia, because at the end, we really talk about composables a lot. And I think that's also an important part of Pinia. It's composables, and composables is crucial for Vue. So it also improves the way you develop Vue applications. I hope you learned something with me today. You can find the slides on that link, and thank you for your attention. Have a wonderful conference.
Thank you. Thank you, Eduardo San Martin Morote. Is that Morote?
Morote.
Morote. Hey, I want to be a JavaScript developer with the initials ESM.
Wait, where are you? Oh, there you are.
Oh,
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
It's all good. So we have time.
ESM. Yeah, I love my initials.
Right?
I have 3 domain names with ESM.
It's the best. So we have time for 2 questions.
Hello, thank you for the talk.
Thanks.
I'm just wondering, on the website, it says you can use either option stores versus regular stores, and it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
And when in doubt, just use option stores as a beginning. I'm wondering if there's any actual performance impact or any other side effects of using either store. Thank you.
Performance-wise, I don't think the difference between option stores and setup store is most of the time worth. But setup stores do give you a lot more control because you are just using a composable, so you can use directly shallow ref, shallow reactive, mark row. So you have access to lower level APIs on Vue that you can still use with the option stores API, but it's not as intuitive and it doesn't always work. So apart from that, just for normal state that is not too complex, like collections, the authenticated user, it shouldn't change too much. I personally do prefer to go for setup stores most of the time because it just makes more sense to use the composition API, and you get access to the full, plethora of functions on composables. You can use Vue use composables as well, so way more powerful than just options API.
Awesome. Thank you for that question.
What are the specific use cases where you would advise not to use Pinia? Can you think of any?
There are many. So I think, as I showed, that sometimes you want to just use a little bit of Pinia. I didn't say it, but Pinia is very light also compared to Vuex. It's 1.5 kilobytes. So I think that was one of the ideas, to scale down, so to introduce it earlier on your project. As were to not use it, there are, wait, let me recall some of the cases. If you can put everything in a component and you don't need a store, for example, if you have some models or tips, sometimes you don't even need to access those tips outside of the store, or sometimes you only need to use the store as a way to cross-communicate between the component, that displays the models or the tips. So what I want to say is don't put everything on the store, okay? Sometimes many things make more sense on the component. And of course, everything that isn't global shouldn't be on the store. Authentication, I usually put it on the store. And you can also treat the stores as services. As a way, this is something I do on workshops, and I've seen other people remind me, the Discord, the Mastering Pinia, is that a store, you can also put the business logic in it, and so it regroups that global business logic. So for example, authentication will be login, logout, etc., with watchers, etc. I wish I had an example to tell you, apart from the ones I had in the talk about not to use Pinia, but other than if it can be in a component and doesn't need to be outside, then it shouldn't be in a store, for example. Like the logic of is the model being displayed, usually it doesn't need to be on the store, but sometimes it needs. It's such a it depends answer at the end of the day because of how the UIs and the actual application client side can be less to more complex. Sorry, I don't have a very specific answer for that.
Perfect, thank you very much. And of course, if you have, start to remember some of the cases, you could put that in Slack as well. And to everyone here, if you do have some questions that come to you thereafter, just definitely drop them in the Slack, or speak to our speakers afterwards. I don't know, lunch. So.
Yeah, you see me about, I will be outside or on Twitter, on
awesome.
Discord.
Give it up for ESM, everyone. I love that name.